Hello, and welcome to the next session, Security Risks for Companies when Adopting a Work-from-Home Strategy. My name is Dimtriy of I'm the VP of Platform Architecture with SonicWall. And in the next 45 minutes, we'll discuss the transformation that has occurred in the past 2 months with the global COVID-19 pandemic, and specifically focusing on the cybersecurity aspects of the migration of the workforce to pretty much 100% mobile workforce around the globe. So we'll start off with by just talking about how SonicWall in general has, and the industry in general, actually, not just SonicWall, has been embracing the anytime, anywhere business. And that anytime, anywhere business has been changing the shape of the IT landscape forever with massively expanding distributed IT reality, which really causes an explosion of exposure points. And this is a conversation that's been relevant for the past 5 years or so as there is a race to digitize, there is a proliferation of applications, devices, the organizations become borderless, there are cloud native applications, there's pervasive cloud adoption even by companies and organizations that have been initially resistant to adopt cloud as they got more comfortable or as the economics have shifted or regulatory landscapes have shifted, they started adopting cloud. But nobody expected, nobody anticipated something like this, accelerating the digital workplace so quickly. And it took a tragedy to effectively make a leap. Satya Nadella of Microsoft said that we made a leap of 2 years in digital transformation in a matter of months. I've seen, I would actually argue it's more, and I've seen other reports that basically would say it's been 5 years worth of digital transformation that occurred in the scope of just a few weeks. But of course, such rapid transformation with it brings certain risks. And while the initial push was primarily to digitize, to enable people to work remotely, I spoke with an insurance company that had to overnight go from approximately 500 remote out of 3,000 people who even knew how to work remotely, meaning that they had laptops, they experienced, they traveled, etc., to having 3,000 people. This is a German company, to have 3,000 people overnight work from home, work remotely. And of course, there are the headlines that associate any large global event such as this. This is an annual occurrence whenever there is tax day or big holidays or big celebrity-related events, etc. The attackers always follow. The malware writers, the phishing actors, they always follow the headlines. So this is a headline from MIT Technology Review: how coronavirus forces world's largest work from home experiment, emphasis on the word experiment. And we can see some of the recent headlines in the press pointing that the attackers, both ranging from opportunistic on the spam, those that are motivated by financial gain, ranging all the way to those motivated by political nation state goals, have been using this pandemic, have been using this crisis as as a way to attack or as a reason to attack. So spy agencies flag possible security breaches of Canadian pandemic research facilities. We see students and experts. There was York University suffering extremely serious cyber attack, and then speaking with university CISOs around the world, one of the things that they're concerned with is their researchers. Now that the researchers have to work from home and work remotely, they're no longer in the lab. One of the concerns now is also for research universities who have to value and protect the research because that research is government funded, right? And it might have national security implications, is rolling out that security now to the researchers who are also working remotely. You have COVID-19 scams. And in this particular case, the headline is a positive one, leading to takedown of more than 1,000 websites in Canada. There are similar headlines on a less positive note, with millions and millions of dollars that are meant as stimulants or financial assistance funds being siphoned off by malicious, by threat actors. One headline from the United States is NASA seeing an exponential jump in malware attacks as personnel work from home. So it's tough to say good news in the current environment, but I'm kind of happy to see that cybersecurity is recognized as a risk. And in a survey done by IDC in Canada, this was a survey done by the ITC IT advisory panel. Let me turn on my laser pointer in April of this year, so a month ago, with 500 Canadian organizations, so this is a very, very healthy sample size, the distribution of concerns between small business versus medium and large business. Small business focused on number one concern: appropriate collaboration tools are not in place. Remote work is not applicable to our industry, so this is restaurants, hospitality or personal services, and cybersecurity and privacy risks. I would actually, for most organizations, I would put number one and number three as linked and joined at the hip, as these organizations rushed to put to place tools that allow remote work into place. They introduced cybersecurity risks. And what I meant, what I was saying earlier, the word with happy is I'm happy to see that there is recognition of the fact that cybersecurity is a risk. So, and then medium and large organizations, they already had the appropriate collaboration tools in place, and they properly recognize that cybersecurity and privacy risks are top concern. Worrying drop in productivity, company does not have a culture of remote or collaborative work. Those things we can deal with, right? We are in a crisis, but cybersecurity is something that can bring down, a small lapse can bring down or significantly hurt an organization. So if we, as a, we've been in this space, I've been in this space for almost 15 years myself personally. The company has been in this space, in the cybersecurity space, for almost 3 decades, in the remote access space for 15 years. And we see two different types of challenges faced by the organizations. So from the IT director and decision maker point of view, they want to simplify access to the infrastructure in a hybrid IT environment. And hybrid IT environment means on-prem, physical on-prem infrastructure. It still exists. I know everybody talks about cloud, but physical on-prem infrastructure still exists, and resources in the cloud. And cloud doesn't necessarily mean SaaS, pure SaaS, such as Dropbox, Salesforce.com, O365, we just log into a portal. Cloud can also mean private cloud, infrastructure as a service, AWS, Google Compute, Azure, right, with resources that are blocked off there or gardened off, walled off there. I want to move my to the cloud while reducing costs, provide 24/7 service availability, meet strict SLAs, and on-brand experience. I'm rushing through these because the two that are most relevant right now are these two. These are general learnings and problems that we've observed from IT directors and decision makers over the past decade with remote access. But in the current environment, these two are the ones that are most relevant. And that's what the rest of the conversation will focus on these two. And now from an IT admin user perspective, on the security side, provide secure access to mission critical applications, control all devices, provide single SSO and single sign-on, and prevent unauthorized access. And again, I'm rushing through this because I want to focus on one specific one. This is not a general grandiose remote access conversation right now. Right now, we're talking about specific cybersecurity problems. So how do we provide secure access to mission critical applications from any device? And any device is a key operative word here because again, I'll use that insurance company in Germany as an example. When they rushed to move 3,000 people to work from home, they couldn't procure a sufficient number of corporate devices that are IT imaged and have the golden IT image with all the latest patches and all that stuff on it. In the United States and Europe, I'm sure this has been a case everywhere where companies rushed to work or to have workforce work remotely. Stores were actually sold out of cheap monitors, laptops, keyboards, etc., and that equipment was hard to come by. So coming back to this operative word here, any device, many companies had to allow their users to access from whatever device they had at home. So it might be a Windows 7 laptop that's never been patched or it hasn't been patched in 8 years. It could be a Windows XP machine that's sitting behind a Linksys router that's running, that's from 15 years ago, that's running a Linux kernel that has multiple remotely executable vulnerabilities, right? That's the reality. They had to get everyone operational. So that's what we're dealing with. So in this conversation, in this survey, and I will try to stay high level as a survey of typical issues and their solutions. I will occasionally dive down into the solution area, down to almost to the bits, not fully down to the bits, because I want to explore in this conversation the range of problems and the range of solutions. And I want you to walk away with not only understanding the specific issues that relate to private resource access, such as VPN, to client security and cloud access security, but I also want you to understand some potential solutions to these problems and some general security advice, because it's still worth repeating some general security advice. So, private resource access, VPN, either on-prem meaning physical, or in the cloud, that's still kind of your premises. Client security and integrity, what to consider for the endpoint. We're not just talking about, oh, update your antivirus here. How do we deal with the fact that somebody's home network could potentially be an extension of your IT? How do you allow remote work without inheriting all the IT and security, especially the security nightmares of a home network that's never had professional management? Cloud access security with organizations that have embraced the cloud, that have embraced SaaS, and with employees working from home, accessing the cloud directly. How does one stay in control of not only the security, so they're not downloading or sharing malware, but what about data leakage? What about compliance with not uploading, medical records or downloading medical records on the device? So those are the concerns. Private resource access, VPN, old technology, still highly relevant. And it's almost like a fabric for more modern distributed organizations. This is how they communicate. So the classic VPN to headquarters, and I'm setting up a backdrop here for, I'm setting up some basics. So to some of you, this might be repetition. Classic VPN to headquarters. I'm at home, I work from home, I connect to the headquarters, I build a network, and I access resources that are inside of the headquarters. I'm sitting at home, my computer behaves as if I'm sitting inside of the headquarters. If I'm using SaaS, Box, SFDC, Ring Central, I go there directly. That's where we talked about the cloud security conversation. There's a modification, there's a variant of this where I'm sitting at home, but my organization has resources not only in the building itself, like a data center, but it also has, we've migrated over the past 5 years, half of our infrastructure into AWS or Azure, because we don't want to host it ourselves anymore. We still control that infrastructure. It's not full SaaS, but it's in the cloud. So we need to have access to both. So when we talk about secure access and encrypted access to the cloud, this is what we're referring to. A user logging into the internal billing application that's actually hosted in a private instance in AWS and Azure, and that is not accessible directly over the internet. They first have to authenticate, right? So as there was this rush to allow work from home, there came certain operational challenges with them brought security challenges. All employees must work from home at the same time. So there was a capacity challenge. You went from 20, 30% mobile to 100% mobile. Must implement this immediately. And we're past this phase now, right? The slide was initially built back in March, where literally I was reading conversations on sysadmin forums where they said, I just walked out of an executive meeting. They told me that by Monday, everybody has to be remote. What do I do? We'll come back to that. So there's speed. People migrated this quickly. Coming back to that comment of 2 years or 5 years, whatever number you believe, of digital transformation in a matter of weeks, there was speed. When there's speed, shortcuts have to be taken. Now we're in the phase where we can delint, or sort of say, go back and fix those mistakes. Maintain data security on uncontrolled endpoints and uncontrolled networks. So most basic advice. And I know that I'm speaking to a high-level CISO level here, but this is advice to your operational teams. Please do not open direct RDP access, remote desktop access. 3389 is the actual port on which remote desktop access works, because that is a massive, massive security risk. It's very easy to do. It seems like a natural, logical thing to do. It is a massive security risk. And two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication everywhere. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And just to emphasize that it's not just random advice, this is from a forum where, this is back in March, somebody said ransomware actors are licking their lips at all of these hastily put up RDP instances, meaning at all of these hastily set up remote desktop connections that are not secured, that are not protected, that are not multi-factor authentication protected, that don't have maybe a VPN device in front of it, that are just naked on the internet. This is easy pickings. So there's a concept. Okay, Dimtriy, you scared me, right? There's a problem. How do I provide remote access in a secure way, right? There is a concept of you can do abstraction, you can do virtual office, and you can think of it like this at a high level. Provide only the absolute minimum, bare minimum of access at the network level so that nothing else can get through that connection. So the choice here is between full access to the network or just the specific application. Let me show you what I mean. I'm sitting at home, I'm on my laptop, I need to connect to my office. A classical VPN will just connect me to the network. I'm in the entire network now. I can access anything, even though I only needed my computer. But I have access to everything. So that means that a virus on my computer, on my home network, also has access to everything. We're the same. There's another way. There's a way where you set up a layer of abstraction of kind of you encapsulate the application where through a virtual portal that a user sees that they get into through multi-factor authentication, they click on, they only get access to the one machine. They can't touch anything else on that network. And it's just a bookmark, it can be an HTML5 rendered page, which is basically completely isolating your corporate network from whatever garbage may be on my home network. This is secure. Now, multi-factor authentication. Oh, this is a very common use case. Something, you will right now hear this advice from every single vendor. Multi-factor authentication on everything. Turn off old protocols. Turn off IMAP. Turn off POP. Enforce multi-factor authentication everywhere. But you might say, I have legacy applications that cannot be modified. I'm too scared to touch them. I don't have the code, whatever. I don't want to touch them. They are critical business. They don't have multi-factor authentication. What do I do? So you have your legacy application with no MFA. This is where you can apply the zero trust model very, very easily to apply all the modern authentication techniques to a server without touching it. You put it on a no-go zone, zero trust access. Nobody has access to it. If you're sitting next to it, connected to, basically connected right next to it in the data center, you can't touch it. You can only access it through a VPN device that enforces multi-factor authentication. It might also do single sign-on. It might do device health check. And then and so when a user, a remote worker, contractor has to go through this device, has to go through the portal, have to do multi-factor authentication, we can also do it with HTML5 isolation, and only then is the gate opened up. Notice you did not touch anything on that legacy server. This is a way for you to continue. Again, this right now, business countries are starting to open up. I'm not going to jump into the fray of whether that's right or wrong, but there is consensus that later this year, when we get back into flu season, there's a high chance that we might have flare-ups of COVID-19 again. So many of the organizations that I speak to are, while they're doing a phased rollout, same with us, we're having a phased reopening. We are mentally ready for the fact that we might have to go into this 100% remote workforce scenario again later this year in the October-November timeframe. Now we have the time to plan for this, right, without a rush. So this is one of the techniques that's in your toolkit in order to protect legacy servers that don't have MFA, because MFA is mandatory everywhere. Let me switch over to home, and I'll come back to MFA, why multi-factor authentication is required everywhere conversation when we talk about cloud security. Home networks. Home networks are horrible. Why? Because they're running $30 switches, $30 routers from your local electronics store. And all of those routers roll off. I like to use the analogy like sunglasses. 99% of all sunglasses are made by one company in a few factories called Luxottica. They're just branded with different brand names differently and charged differently, but they're all coming off of the same factory. It's kind of, I'm stretching the analogy a little bit, but it's kind of similar with all of these consumer devices, TP-Link, D-Link, etc. And many of them never ever get patched because the users don't even know how to patch them. They don't even know that they need patching. They might be running old code. They have default passwords. Home networks are terrible. And yet now these networks are becoming an extension of most organizations' IT department. And the internet is drowning in COVID-19 related malware and phishing scams, which users sitting at home, working from home, are more susceptible to because they don't have all the protection that they might have when they're sitting inside the building. And yes, you might have endpoint anti-malware, etc., but that layered defense is usually the name of the game, right? And that's just one layer of protection. So um, client security, some immediate basic hygiene, things to consider now that every home network is an extension of IT. Yes, you have to protect against malware. Absolutely. Please make sure that your machines have updated next gen AV. I'm talking about not the traditional signature based, old antivirus clients, updated OSs, updated browsers. Protect against phishing and business email compromise with email and cloud security protection. And I cannot scream 2FA, MFA, 2FA, MFA being mandatory enough. Then we talk about protecting the home network, isolating the user. So the user is on the network, but they're sharing the same network with their teenage kids, with their spouses, with their family members who might be clicking, downloading things, running things on their network. There are ways to isolate the employees, either via software, where the moment they turn on their machine, their corporate machine, it already has an isolated VPN that doesn't have access to anything except corporate resources, or via hardware. And I'll talk about that. You can create an island. You can create an island inside their home network to isolate them from everyone else. And I'll talk about that. And protect the corporate network. Device health check is a nice, I've spoken with enough companies now in the past 2 months who have told me kind of similar story. Listen, device health checks are a beautiful theory. There, you only allow connection from a fully patched Windows 10 machine or a fully patched OS X machine, and otherwise they're not allowed to go. But the reality, again, is we pushed everyone to go home, to work from whatever they had at home, and they have to be operational. So that theory breaks down. So in reality, that's where there are other tools such as HTML5 browser isolation, where you can be logged in from the most virus-ridden machine, and yet the network that you're connecting to is unaffected. Please do have two-factor authentication on that device. So yes, there's endpoint security, and of all the endpoint security capabilities, the ones that are most applicable in today's world, again, next-gen AV client protection, ATP integration, so when there are suspicious files, sending them for live detonation in cloud analysis, USB device control, preventing certain USB devices from connecting, but there are also things like URL filtering. You can roll out URL filtering that might happen in an on-prem location through a client to the endpoint device. And this depends on the sensitivity of the organization and how strong they are with acceptable use policies. But for example, schools that might hand out laptops to students are still liable in many cases for the acceptable use of what those students are visiting on those laptops, whether they're Chromebooks or whether they're Windows machines. And therefore, so there are solutions in order that allow you to roll out cloud-based control of URL filtering to ensure that little Johnny is not visiting pornography websites on a school-issued machine. All right, moving on. Did you say access point island? Yes, this is an interesting use case scenario. Now, it's not applicable for all employees. It's applicable for high value targets that are not used to working remotely. So what I mean by this is, first of all, what does access point island do? It gives you the experience of as if I'm in the office, and it separates from dirty home networks. I'll explain how it works, but it's really good for isolating high value targets. So imagine a accounts payable, accounts receivable person, legal person who doesn't typically work from home. They always come into the office, they have their office, they've always worked from the office, everything works for them. When they go home, they don't connect, right? All of a sudden, they're forced to work from home. They don't have that same operational experience of connecting. They don't have the same senses as like an experienced exec or salesperson who's always on the road connecting from hotels, coffee shops, etc., right? Who kind of have built up immunity to what's real, what's not, and how to defend themselves. But yet this person in legal and finance, etc., might be dealing with extremely sensitive documents. They might need they might need a VoIP phone. They might need a printer. And they're dealing with very, very sensitive information, but they're doing it from a very insecure network. So how do we deal with this scenario? So there's this person at home. They have an office and they have a home Wi-Fi. Everyone has a home Wi-Fi. There's a corporate Wi-Fi. What you can do, or what there is a solution for this, is there are cloud managed access points, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be, you don't think of it as focusing on wireless specifically. There are VoIP ports for their physical ports for printers, things like that. But the point is they're cloud managed. The user does not need to configure anything. They're fully cloud managed, zero touch provisioned, that automatically build a tunnel to the office, and they create a corporate Wi-Fi at home. So now this person from finance or from legal, who is used to getting their coffee, sitting down, connecting their computer, automatically connects to corporate Wi-Fi, and they start working. All of a sudden, the same thing happens at home. They get their coffee, they connect their laptop, there's corporate Wi-Fi, but it's showing up at home, and everything just works. But they're teenage kids cannot connect to the same network because they don't have the same corporate Wi-Fi credentials. So they're isolated now. And you can even issue them a VoIP phone to plug into this, or a printer or whatever, right? They are now on an island inside their dirty home network. Obviously, this is not applicable to all employees. This would be financially cost prohibitive. But again, it's for these high value targets, it's a useful tool. Because again, home networks, if you're not vigilant, people's dirty home networks will become an extension of your IT environment. Coming back to multi-factor authentication, this sentence takes a little bit to sink in. The credentials of your least security conscious person become the gateway to your data. There have been multiple examples where someone will give up their credentials for like a $5 or $10 gift certificate, right? Or as part of a survey, or they just get a phone call and hey, this is Dimtriy from IT. Have you been having issues with your computer? Well, everybody always has issues with their computer. Oh yeah, what's your username and password? I just want to check something. We noticed something funny going on with your machine, right? People give up their credentials. People don't think defensively. So without multi-factor authentication, now I can get into all your SaaS applications. I can steal information. So here's an example from our company. Actually, I removed personally identifiable information. This is a real email that came in to one of our sales VPs. The CEO literally, so somebody crafted this. They found our CEO's name. They crafted this document. They sent it to the sales VP. This was an attachment, said, hey, this is what the attachment looked like. It's a review document. Obviously, this leads to either malware or phishing site, etc. Business email compromise is a huge risk. And business email compromise, if you don't know what that is, please educate yourselves and your organization on this. It's one of the biggest sources of money loss. It by far outstrips things like fake checks or actual direct theft. It's where I might impersonate, you typically impersonate an executive, send an email, hey, this is whatever, Dimtriy, I'm this, let's say the CEO of the company, I'm traveling right now, can you please wire $30,000 to this account? I need to close a deal quickly. Right, and if somebody challenges them, they usually, the person, the attacker, they will say, look, I don't have time to deal with this, do this right now, right? So they try to overpower, and people do it. There are some very much clever ways of business email compromise, such as an attacker might discover the other vendors that you deal with, that you work with, or they might just guess. Typically, you deal with CDW, you might deal with Ingram, you might deal with certain vendors, and they will send emails like this, or they'll craft very authentic looking emails to your accounts payables department. And they'll say, hi, this is Dimtriy from Ingram Micro, and we're updating our account. Can you just please update our information? Looks legitimate. I know, a person who is not expecting this type of an attack will just update the bank account. And now all the payments are going to Dimitri's personal bank account. Anyway, the point is, the multi-factor authentication and protection against these cloud phishing attacks are critical, and especially for companies that are more cloud focused, right? That are cloud native, that use SaaS. Email is the #1 threat vector for you. Spam, malicious URLs, malicious attachments, and it's credential compromise. Credential compromise is a big malware business now, because Coming back to that sentence on the previous slide, if I steal your least security conscious person's credentials, I can, if you don't have multi-factor authentication, I can log into your O365, I can log into your Salesforce, I can log into your Dropbox. People reuse their passwords, I'm in, right? We talk about phishing schemes, malware, social engineering. The reason why the cloud, I mentioned this earlier, but I'll repeat it. The reason why the cloud is a slightly different use case is because now people working from home access the cloud directly. There is no firewall, there is no CASB between you and them. How do you secure that? There are ways, so cloud application security, completely cloud-based service, no software to install, no appliances to deploy. It's just cloud to cloud API-based communication provisioning where you literally have, excuse me, where you literally just have a menu of cloud services. Which of these cloud services do you use? Let's onboard, provision, and now everybody with @dimtriy.net domain who logs into Box and uploads files, immediately the security service gets to see that file, analyze it, make sure it's not malware, make sure that it's not, there's no DLP violation, and if there is a violation, take remediate, take action, send an alert. It's all cloud-based. Anyway, this is not technical training. I'm just doing a scope of all the different capabilities. So across all of the boundless points of exposure, typically we would talk about there's network, there's email, there's endpoint, there's cloud, and there's cloud, there's SaaS, infrastructure as a service, etc. Right now, we will focus on remote access, cloud access, endpoint access. I talked about multi-factor authentication, precise pinpoint VPN access with HTML5 isolation in order to isolate the malware on the remote, or isolate the risks from home networks. We talked about multi-factor authentication deployment for legacy servers, endpoint protection, cloud SaaS protection. I will be, so this is part of where I'm with SonicWall. This is part of our view of the SonicWall boundless cybersecurity model, where we provide multi-layer protection and all of our products plug into the same threat research system where as they come across files, they submit them in our cloud-based analysis. And that analysis, if it's something that we've seen before, if it's something that's easily identifiable, it's blocked, that protection typically happens on the device itself. But if it's something that we've never seen before, if it's a previously unseen attack, or if it's a file that typically can, like an executable that we cannot automatically rule is benign, it goes through an advanced analysis of our multi-engine sandbox and through our patent-pending real-time deep memory inspection, which all basically explode the file, run the file. And the reason why we talk about we have all these different techniques is to avoid evasion. If the malware can evade one technique, the chances are they can invade 3 or 4 are virtually nil. We have a very high detection of malware that we call previously unseen, meaning that we detect that it's malicious, but for example, in VirusTotal, nobody's ever seen it. So we have a jump on the bad guys by, in many cases, by several days, in some cases by several weeks with this technique, and all of our capabilities plug into this ability. We call that Capture ATP. That concludes the prepared remarks of this presentation. I'm going to see, I have not been looking at the Q&A. If there are questions, let me check whether there any questions came in. 1 second. Let me see if there's a question coming in. How do smaller companies budget for cybersecurity, especially for smaller workforce? Great question. They're appropriate. So one of the things that security companies do is everything that I discussed today, by the way, there are solutions for large enterprises and there are solutions for small environments, like think SOHO, small office, home office. The key is the level of protection is the same across the board on all of them. Just because it's a small office compared to the large office does not mean that it should have less security, because in a normal environment, the branches are part of the organization. If you compromise a branch, you're in. I can now, as an attacker, can pivot inside, I can move around. Your branch has to have as strong of security as does your HQ. In today's reality, I would love to be able to say that your home, your users, your employees' home networks have to be as secure, but that's unrealistic. So what I emphasize is that you batten down the hatches on the organization, provide very, very secure access from their homes so that their homes don't compromise your network, and then opportunistically or as you need, increase the security on their location. So there are cloud tools that are, more economically accessible. There are software tools, of course, so again, rolling out an appliance for every single user. For some industries, it's absolutely a breeze because the risk way outweighs the cost. For many industries, it's not viable, so that's where there are software solutions. But what I want to emphasize in my answer is that solutions that at least we provide, whether they're tiny or whether they're huge, very large, we emphasize that the level of protection is the same across the board. What do you suggest as a minimum security for BYOD laptops? Great question. So let me take that question from two angles. There's security for the laptop, and there's the security to protect yourself against that laptop. Okay, what is the security for that laptop? I recommend going with an NGA, the next gen AV. That's a term. If you've never heard of it, Google it. Next gen AV solution. And the idea here is to use machine learning on the device itself rather than signatures. So then the way that it works is that that client is now been trained through looking at hundreds of millions of samples and their behavior of how a typical malicious program behaves. So when it sees another program run on the machine, it doesn't necessarily, like old antivirus would say, do you match any of my signatures? Yes or no? In a lot of cases, antivirus could not keep up. Whereas now, next gen AV, what it does is it says, I'm looking at this program, and it correlates with a very strong statistical correlation, because machine learning is just statistics. It correlates with a very strong it has very strong correlation with malicious behavior. I think you're malicious. I'm going to take action. So for example, when a Word document starts opening up network connections and writing to the Windows registry, that's very easy to tell that that should not be happening, right? So it's behavioral analysis rather than signature analysis. That's one of the things. I mean, obviously, the most basic advice for protecting laptops is make sure that they're 100% patched. Make it mandatory to patch the browsers, patch the OSs. Those patches are not for fun. They're 9 out of 10 times they are security issues, not functionality issues. They're security issues. Patching is critical. Now, to shift gears, protecting from those laptops. So how do you protect yourself from all the employees' home or whatever laptops? And again, the most important one the most important, or probably the most ROI, biggest punch use case is provide access through VPN only to the resource that they need, not to the full VPN network. That's that virtual office scenario that I talked about. If you want more detail, we can have one of our sales engineers get in touch with you, to give you a demo, etc. But think of it as like opening the door and letting someone in versus just handing them an envelope through a mail slot, right? That's kind of the difference between the two. Let's see another topic. Kind of off topic, but as a student who just completed their undergrad in IT wants to go into cybersecurity, what sort of certifications should I be aiming for on, and what's the best route to take? Love that question. How should I get into cybersecurity? First of all, I advise that you look. There's a multitude of resources available for this. If you go to this, I assume you as a student know a website called Reddit. If you go to subreddit/netsec or sysadmin, right? But ask NetSec. There are multiple threads that talk exactly about how to get into it, certifications. I can't speak specifically to certain certifications, but my best advice would be understand how things work and get your hands dirty. If you understand how things work and you're willing to get your hands dirty, within a few years, you'll find yourself exactly where you want to be. All right. I don't see any other questions. So I think we're going to, one more. Employees who use their VPN on work laptops to do non-work related tasks, sometimes malicious, can the employer track this activity? And should this be an educational topic? Great question. So um, it depends on how, okay, it depends on what you, how you configure the VPN and what other software, whether you have the, what kind of endpoint client you have. So let's take that into two parts. And again, to repeat, the question is, employees who use VPNs on their work laptops and do non-work related tasks, and sometimes they're malicious, can you monitor and track that activity? Okay, so first of all, if I flashed a slide of our client. One of the things that we can do is we can look at the applications running. We can do application risk assessment. In fact, let me see if I can. Oh, I have it in my backup slides. So, for example, nope, nope. Application risk management. We can look, first of all, if they're running risky or unpatched applications, right? I can look at Dave's Mac, and I see that Dave's Mac has a critical VLC player that has critical vulnerabilities, and you now have information that Dave's Mac is actually vulnerable for potential overtake. So in this particular case, Dave himself is not doing something bad, but he is vulnerable to doing something bad. There are, as part of the VPN suite, you can also, when they connect with VPN, we have a capability called endpoint control. And endpoint control can verify what applications are running or are installed. And the best, we love to do this type of a demo because everyone understands it. It's kind of silly, but it gets the point across. I can create a policy that says you are not allowed to be connected to my network if you have Notepad running. That's what makes it a silly example, but it's relatable. You can, if you open up Notepad, you get kicked off. And we literally have a demo where a user gets connected, they're on the network, they open up Notepad and they get kicked off the network right away and they get a notification. They close Notepad, they get reconnected. So it's a real-time health check and kind of behavioral check on the endpoint device. So that's what you can do on the endpoint itself. So what you see on the screen is risk assessment. Do they have vulnerable applications? Are they crazy vulnerable right now? And if they visit the website that does drive-by downloads and drive-by attacks, they're just going to get completely owned, right? You can call that person and tell them to get their house in order. On the other hand, so I said about it also depends on how it's configured. If you route their traffic through your network, then you can see everything that they're doing and you can control it. That's not a typical deployment anymore. That used to be a typical deployment 10 years ago, but that's one way to see it. There are other ways to monitor. I just honestly, off the top of my head, I'm not fully familiar with all the monitoring capabilities of VPN solutions, but what I just gave you is the endpoint, is what you can do on the endpoint, application risk assessment, endpoint control, and yeah, you could, if you're really, really paranoid, you could just route all of their traffic through your network and do the control there. All right, thank you for that question. And again, I'm trying to not to go too much into weeds and here. If you have questions, one of our engineers will be more than happy to follow up with you. All right, smaller businesses that provide work phones to employees sometimes do not use VPNs on the phones. Is this something that should be mandatory regardless of the size of the company? So the question is, if they provide phones to their employees, then the phones don't use VPNs. Should that be mandatory? I actually don't know. I'll claim ignorance on here. I'm not intimately familiar with the security protocols and security implications of an unencrypted VoIP phone. I assume they have some sort of built-in encryption. Typically, I approach the topic of phones, like in the example of the at-home Wi-Fi island, from a point of convenience where things just magically work, right? They plug it in and it just works. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if there's security issues with it. I assume they have some sort of encryption built in, but I'm not sure. Sorry. If you're a university doing remote learning, how would pooled licenses help? If you're a university doing remote learning, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, to be honest. I mean, this is probably relating specifically to pooled licensing on VPN. I'm sorry, I don't fully understand that question, but I do want to share on some use cases around universities, since you reminded me. Speaking with multiple universities, primarily in Europe, there are some things that universities can do right now to better enable their students to continue to operate because their students are now sitting in the dorms. So one university, what they did, and later I found out that others, when I asked them, they admitted to doing the same thing. Many journals, many scientific journals and resources allow access based on licensing that's tied to the IP address from which the connection is coming from. So for example, if you want to access research journals, the research journal will say, okay, access from this IP block, which is the university's IP block, is permitted. But now students are working at home and they still need access to those research documents. So what these universities have done is they use VPN to give access to a pool of virtual machines, and students can log in through the VPN portal and they can access those journals from the IP block of the university. Effectively, think of it as business continuity, but for universities. Same, likewise, there might be licensing that's tied to a number of machines for software that require, some more sophisticated scientific software, CAD software. It checks for licensing on a local server, and there can only be a certain number of machines that can run it, and those machines are pre-authorized. They use VPN for remote access so that the students can continue and researchers can continue to work from their apartments, houses, dorms, whatever, without interruption. So again, it's business continuity, but the word business is not applicable here. All right, I think that brings us to the end of the questions. Thank you for the participation. Thank you for the questions. And with that, have a good weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dimtriy, for your amazing presentation. Honestly, it was really informative. I think the audience really loved it. They were engaging a lot in discussion. And yes,
Cool.
stay
Thank you.
safe. This was an amazing presentation.
All right, thank you very much.
Have a
Take
good
care.
one.
Thank you for your help.
No problem.
All right, bye-bye.